My name is Colin Hyde and I now live in Ilminster in Somerset. But back in the spring of 1965, I was a 17-year-old sixth former at Beckenham Grammar School in South London. Friday mornings from 11 o'clock until lunchtime were given over to a series of guest speakers. Our head teacher, Mr. D.A. Rayburn, invited people from various walks of life to talk to his sixth form gentlemen on subjects beyond the normal curriculum. On one memorable occasion, a group of like-minded students took over the session, with DA's blessing, to present an anti-war symposium. Our audience consisted of the rest of the sixth form, about 200 boys, and our teaching staff, which included many men who had fought in World War II, and an exiled German professor who had arrived in the UK in the mid-30s. He alone really appreciated the quotation from Catch-22 that you'll hear later, understanding as he did the translation of Lieutenant Shyskov's name into English. What follows here is a reimagining of this formative event in my life. The original programme consisted of a series of readings, mostly poems from World War I, but some prose too, and a few songs. I didn't keep a list of what we read and sang that day, but some of the pieces read here were also read 55 years ago on that school stage. More importantly, the message is the same today as it was all those years ago. War is an unutterably tragic waste of mankind, and in the case of the First World War particularly, animal kind too. It is estimated that some 8 million horses perished alongside their human counterparts between 1914 and 1918. I'd like to thank again all those people who have taken part in this project by providing recordings of themselves reading and singing. Everything was managed remotely during these COVID times, and I have assembled the results into a half-hour sequence that is available on YouTube from the 11th of November 2020. I'd also like to recognise the writers who provided all the great words and word pictures that inspired the original event in 1965. Their names appear in the credits. Any money raised will go to the Ilminster Tree Project.
I know that I shall meet my fate somewhere among the clouds above. Those that I fight I do not hate, those that I guard I do not love. My country is Kiltartan Cross. My countrymen Kiltartans poor. No likely end could bring them loss or leave them happier than before. Nor law nor duty bade me fight, nor public man nor cheering crowds. A lonely impulse of delight drove to this tumult in the clouds. I balanced all, brought all to mind. The years to come seemed waste of breath, a waste of breath the years behind, in balance with this life, this death.
Oh, I don't want to be a soldier. I don't want to go to war. I'd rather hang around Piccadilly Underground, living off the earnings of a lady typist. I don't want a bayonet in my belly. I don't want me bollocks shot away. I'd rather stay in England, in merry, merry England, and fornicate me bleeding life away.
Oh, blimey, Gov.
Base details. If I were fierce and bald and short of breath, I'd live with scarlet majors at the base and speed glum heroes up the line to death. You'd see me with my puffy, petulant face, guzzling and gulping in the best hotel. Reading the Roll of Honour. Poor young chap, I'd say. I used to know his father well. Yes, we've lost heavily in this last scrap. And when the war is done and youth's stone dead, I toddle safely home and die in bed. Oh.
I dropped here 3 weeks ago. Yes, I know. And it's bitter cold at night since the fight. I could tell you if I chose. No one knows except me and 4 or 5 what ain't alive. I can see them all asleep, 3 men deep, and they're nowhere near a fire, but our wire has them fast as fast can be. Can't you see when the flare goes up? Shh, boys, what's that noise? Do you know what these rats eat? Body meat. After you've been down a week and your cheek gets as pale as life and night seems as white as the day, only the rats and their brats seem more hungry when the day's gone away. And they look big as bulls and they pulls till you almost sort of shout, but the drought, what you hadn't felt before, makes you sore, and at times you even think of a drink. There's a leg across my thighs. If my eyes weren't too sore, I'd like to see who it be. I wonder if I'd know the bloke if I woke. Woke? But damn, I'm not asleep. There's a heap of us wondering why the hell we're not well. Leastwise I am. Since I came, it's the same with the others. They don't know what I do, or they wouldn't gape and grin. It's a sin to say that hell is hot, 'cause it's not. Mind you, I know very well we're in hell. In a twisted hump we lie, heaping high, yes, and higher every day. Oh, I say, this chap's heavy on my thighs, damn his eyes.
Dulce et decorum est. Bent double like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags, we cursed through the sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots, but limped on, bloodshod. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas! Gas! Quick, boys! An ecstasy of fumbling fitting the clumsy helmets just in time, but someone still was yelling out and stumbling and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori.
The General. Good morning, the General said when we met him last week on our way to the line. Now the soldiers he smiled at are most of them dead, and we're cursing his staff for incompetent swine. He's a cheery old card, grunted Harry to Jack as they slogged up to Arras with rifle and pack. But he did for them both by his plan of attack.
This is no case of petty right or wrong that politicians or philosophers can judge. I hate not Germans, nor grow hot with the love of Englishmen to please newspapers. Beside my hate for one fat patriot, my hatred of the Kaiser is love true. A kind of god he is, banging a gong. But I am not to choose between the two, or between justice and injustice. Dinned with war and argument, I read no more than in the storm smoking along the wind athwart the wood. Two witches' cauldrons wrought, from one the weather shall rise clear and gay, out of the other an England beautiful and like her mother that died yesterday. Little I know or care if being dull I shall miss something that historians can rake out of the ashes when perchance the phoenix broods serene above their ken. But with the best and meanest Englishmen I am one in crying, God save England, lest we lose what never slaves and cattle blessed. The ages made her that made us from dust. She is all we know and live by, and we trust she is good and must endure, loving her so. And as we love ourselves, we hate our foe.
This section of Catch-22 describes how Lieutenant Scheistkopf drills his squadron. Finishing last in 3 successive parades had given Lieutenant Scheistkopf an unsavoury reputation, and he considered every means of improvement, even nailing the 12 men in each rank to a long 2x4 beam of seasoned oak to keep them in line. The plan was not feasible, for making a 90-degree turn would have been impossible without nickel alloy swivels inserted in the small of every man's back, and Lieutenant Scheistkopf was not sanguine at all about obtaining that many nickel alloy swivels from Quartermaster or enlisting the cooperation of the surgeons at the hospital. The week after Lieutenant Scheistkopf followed Clevenger's recommendation and let the men elect their own cadet officers, the squadron won the Yellow Pennant. Lieutenant Scheistkopf was so elated by his unexpected achievement that he gave his wife a sharp crack over the head with the pole when she tried to drag him into bed to celebrate by showing their contempt for the sexual mores of the lower middle classes in Western civilization. The next week, the squadron won the Red Flag, and Lieutenant Scheistkopf was beside himself with rapture. And the week after that, his squadron made history by winning the Red Pennant 2 weeks in a row. Now, Lieutenant Scheistkopf had confidence enough in his powers to spring his big surprise. Lieutenant Scheistkopf had discovered in his extensive research that the hands of marchers, instead of swinging freely as was then the popular fashion, ought never to be moved more than 3 inches from the centre of the thigh, which meant, in effect, that they were scarcely to be swung at all. Lieutenant Scheistkopf's preparations were elaborate and clandestine. All the cadets in his squadron were sworn to secrecy and rehearsed in the dead of night on the auxiliary parade ground. They marched in darkness that was pitch and bumped into each other blindly, but they did not panic, and they were learning to march without swinging their hands. Lieutenant Scheistkopf's first thought had been to have a friend of his in the sheet metal shop sink pegs of nickel alloy into each man's thigh bones and link them to the wrists by strands of copper wire with exactly 3 inches of play, but there wasn't time. There was never enough time, and good copper wire was hard to come by in wartime. He remembered also that the men so hampered would be unable to fall properly during the impressive fainting ceremony preceding the marching, and that an inability to faint properly might affect the unit's rating as a whole. And all week long he chortled with repressed delight at the officers' club. Speculation grew rampant among his closest friends. "I wonder what that shithead is up to," Lieutenant Eagle said. Lieutenant Scheistkopf responded with a knowing smile to the queries of his colleagues. "You'll find out Sunday," he promised. "You'll find out." Lieutenant Scheistkopf unveiled his epochal surprise that Sunday with all the aplomb of an experienced impresario. He said nothing while the other squadrons ambled past the reviewing stand crookedly in their customary manner. He gave no sign even when the first ranks of his own squadron hove into sight with their swingless marching, and the first stricken gasps of alarm were hissing from his startled fellow officers. He held back even then until the bloated colonel with a big fat moustache whirled upon him savagely with a purpling face, and then he offered the exclamation that has made him immortal. "Look, Colonel," he announced, "no hands." Dead Man's Dump by Isaac Rosenberg.
The plunging limbers over the shattered track, racketed with their rusty freight, stuck out like many crowns of thorns, and the rusty stakes like sceptres old to stay the flood of brutish men upon our brothers dear. The wheels lurched over sprawled dead, but pained them not, though their bones crunched. Their shut mouths made no moan. They lie there huddled, friend and foeman, man born of man and born of woman. And shells go crying over them from night till night and now. Earth has waited for them all the time of their growth, fretting for their decay. Now she has them at last, in the strength of their strength, suspended, stopped and held. What fierce imaginings their dark souls lit. Earth, have they gone into you? Somewhere they must have gone, and flung on your hard back is their soul's sack, emptied of God ancestral essences. Who hurled them out? Who hurled? None saw their spirit's shadow shake the grass, or stood aside for the half-used life to pass, out of those doomed nostrils and the doomed mouth, when the swift iron-burning bee drained the wild honey of their youth. What of us who, flung on the shrieking pyre, walk, our usual thoughts untouched, our lucky limbs as on ichor fed? Immortal seeming ever? Perhaps when the flames beat loud on us, a fear may choke in our veins, and the startled blood may stop. The air is loud with death. The dark air spurts with fire. The explosions ceaseless are. Timelessly now, some minutes past, those dead strode time with vigorous life, till the shrapnel called an end. But not to all. In bleeding pangs, some born on stretchers dreamed of home, dear things, war blotted from their hearts. Maniac earth, howling and flying, your bowels seared by the jagged fire, the iron love, the impetuous storm of savage love, dark earth, dark heavens, swinging in chemic smoke, what dead are born when you kiss each soundless soul with lightning and thunder from your mind heart, which man's self dug and his blind fingers loosed. A man's brain splattered on a stretcher-bearer's face. His shook shoulders slipped their load, but when they bent to look again, the drowning soul was sunk too deep for human tenderness. They left this dead with the older dead, stretched at the crossroads. Burnt black by strange decay, their sinister faces lie, the lid over each eye, the grass and coloured clay, more motion have than they, joined to the great sunk silences. Here is one not long dead, his dark hearing caught out far wheels, and the choked soul stretched weak hands to reach the living word. The far wheels said, the blood-dazed intelligence beating for light, crying through the suspense of the far torturing wheels, swift for the end to break, or the wheels to break, cried as the tide of the world broke over his sight. Will they come? Will they ever come? Even as the mixed hoofs of the mules, the quivering bellied mules, and the rushing wheels all mixed with his torturing upturned sight, so we crashed round the bend. We heard his weak scream. We heard his very last sound, and our wheels grazed his dead face.
Today we have naming of parts. Yesterday we had daily cleaning, and tomorrow morning we shall have what to do after firing. But today we have naming of parts. Japonica glistens like coral in all of the neighbouring gardens, and today we have naming of parts. This is the lower sling swivel, And this is the upper sling swivel, whose use you will see when you are given your slings. And this is the piling swivel, which in your case you have not got. The branches hold in the gardens their silent, eloquent gestures, which in our case we have not got. This is the safety catch, which is always released with an easy flick of the thumb, and please do not let me see anyone using his finger. You can do it quite easy if you have any strength in your thumb. The blossoms are fragile and motionless, never letting anyone see any of them using their finger. And this, you can see, is the bolt. The purpose of this is to open the breech. As you see, we can slide it rapidly backwards and forwards. We call this easing the spring. And rapidly backwards and forwards, the early bees are assaulting and fumbling the flowers. They call it easing the spring. They call it easing the spring. It is perfectly easy if you have any strength in your thumb, like the bolt and the breech and the cocking piece and the point of balance, which in our case we have not got. And the almond blossom silent in all of the gardens, and the bees going backwards and forwards. For today we have naming of parts.
You have no grave, no cross, but you did die. Maybe in some dark thicket your bones lie, or you were sunk in swamp in deep of night, or Cossacks cruelly robbed you of the light, and when it was, and where, and how, and why, I know not. Death in forest does not cry. You are a skull now, white bleached by the rain, round which the weasel lightly leaves his train. You are the ploughed earth on which horses stand. You are the grain that once did crown the land. You are the bread the farmer once did eat. You are the strength when peace returns to greet.
Anthem for doomed youth. What passing bells for these who die as cattle? Only the monstrous anger of the guns, only the stuttering rifle's rapid rattle can patter out their hasty orisons. No mockeries now for them, no prayers nor bells, nor any voice of mourning save the choirs, the shrill, demented choirs of wailing shells, and bugles calling for them from sad shires. What candles may be held to speed them all? Not in the hands of boys, but in their eyes shall shine the holy glimmers of goodbyes. The pallor of girls' brows shall be their pall, their flowers the tenderness of patient minds, and each slow dusk a drawing down of blinds.
Died of wounds. His wet white face and miserable eyes brought nurses to him more than groans and sighs. But hoarse and low and rapid rose and fell his troubled voice. He did the business well. The ward grew dark, but he was still complaining and calling out for Dickie. Curse the wood! It's time to go! Oh Christ, and what's the good? We'll never take it, and it's always raining. I wondered where he'd been, then heard him shout, They snipe like hell! Oh Dickie, don't go out! I fell asleep. Next morning he was dead, and some slight wound lay smiling on the bed.
The guns spell money's ultimate reason in letters of lead on the spring hillside. But the boy lying dead under the olive trees was too young and too silly to have been notable to their important eye. He was a better target for a kiss. When he lived, tall factory hooters never summoned him, nor did restaurant plate glass doors revolve to wave him in. His name never appeared in the papers. The world maintained its traditional wall round the dead with their gold sunk deep as a well, whilst his life, intangible as a stock exchange rumour, drifted outside. Oh, too lightly he threw down his cap one day when the breeze threw petals from the trees. The unflowering wall sprouted with guns. Machine gun anger quickly scythed the grasses. Flags and leaves fell from hands and branches. The tweed cap rotted in the nettles. Consider his life, which was valueless in terms of employment, hotel ledgers, news files. Consider 1 bullet in 10,000 kills a man. Ask, was so much expenditure justified on the death of one so young and so silly, lying under the olive trees? O world, O death.
When this lousy war is over, no more soldiering for me. When I get my civvy clothes on, oh, how happy I shall be. No more church parades on Sundays, no more putting in for leave. I will kiss the sergeant major. How I'll miss him, how he'll grieve. Amen.
Aftermath. Have you forgotten yet? For the world's events have rumbled on since those gagged days, like traffic checked while at the crossing of city ways. And the haunted gap in your mind has filled with thoughts that flow, like clouds in the lit heaven of life, and you're a man reprieved to go, taking your peaceful share of time with joy to spare. But the past is just the same, and war's a bloody game. Have you forgotten yet? Look down and swear by the slain of the war that you'll never forget. Do you remember the dark months you held the sector at Mametz? The nights you watched and wired and dug and piled sandbags on parapets? Do you remember the rats and the stench of corpses rotting in front of the front-line trench? And dawn coming, dirty white and chill with a hopeless rain? Do you ever stop and ask, is it all going to happen again? Do you remember that hour of din before the attack? And the anger, the blind compassion that seized and shook you then, as you peered at the doomed and haggard faces of your men? Do you remember the stretcher cases lurching back, with dying eyes and lolling heads, those ashen grey masks of the lads who once were keen and kind and gay? Have you forgotten yet? Look up and swear by the green of the spring that you'll never forget.
The Voyage Back by R.C.M. Howard. It was the time of voyaging back. It was the time, now at last, we'd come to the end of the days and nights we went patrolling the wastes of ocean. We'll not retrace our wake, all that is past. The salt-bleached struggling ship, the frozen spray in the rigging, like filigree icing, and the sight of seamen's wind-scored faces as they hump the shells with blue-red hands to the taut, whitened, intractable single whip tackle, while the ship plunges and races, shudders and slips to the slash of the waves, and the stomach feels tightened in a gritted, queasy contraction, and the smell from the galley swims in the head, and the staler stench of tobacco smoke stains fingers and mouth. To watch no more for the green break of light that stilly creeps out of the spume, to etch again the twisted convoy lanes. And later, the stretched-off stragglers hove up from the pallid mouth of a snowing dawn. To feel, to know, to touch this no more, to say it's done, for a few years at least, makes the heart want to shout with the joy of relief for the flesh that was flayed by the raw, racking winds from the south and the west. Praise God, it was the last time. We were just about at the end of the rope, waking or sleeping. We dreamed of the plunge and the rise and the endless wind and the rime of the needling frost that ate its way into eyes and ears and brain. No wonder I saw a young seaman, his face puckered and weeping, as we ran in the lee of the land back to port, and he felt the rain falling quietly down from a sky that stood still, out of a peace that spelled home, gentleness, love. His tears were only the tears of release.